I wanted to talk to you today about the war at home. So we know that Canada decided to participate in World War II, and that was a voluntary decision, unlike it was in World War I, where we kind of felt obligated to participate in the war because of our colonial ties. So we made a little bit more of a conscientious decision. It took about a week in Parliament for Canada to decide that they were going to participate in World War II, and it was going to be on a strictly voluntary basis. By 1942, Canada was committed to a policy of total war. All industries, material, and people were put to work for the war effort. So again, in Canada, we had the War Measures Act enacted, similar to what it was when we were in World War I. So we kind of launched right out of the Depression, elected R.B. Bennett. Thank you so much to those who were able to kind of select the most ideal prime minister to help resolve the Depression. I posted in your comments that it was actually R.B. Bennett who won, so we were looking at that as well. And Minister Howe controlled the munitions and supplies and quickly organized Canada's war economy. And he assumed very dictatorial powers, which meant that, he took charge, he was ready to go, and he said, okay, all of our factories need to turn into munitions factories, and we had to start production on those. So from 1939 to 1945, these are the amounts of military weapons that we were able to contribute to the war effort. We had 900,000 rifles, 244,000 machine guns, 850,000 military vehicles. So there was a lot that we ended up doing. So in taking into consideration those rates alongside all of the different rifles, bullets, and bombs that had to be made, so many men were enlisting in the war. So again, we called on the women to go ahead and move forward with participating in the munitions factories, which was very similar to World War I. So parallel to World War I, single women were encouraged to go into the factories, and then wives, and then mothers. And in order to make it more attractive and appealing to women who were mothers, what they did was they started to set up government-funded daycare so that women can go and work in the munitions factories. So you can see down here are women working in the munitions factories and trying to support the war effort in the way that they thought possible. For the first time in Canadian history, women were able to enlist in divisions of the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. This is actually a picture of the 1st Canadian Women's Battalion. And there were women participating in the home front and also participating in the war effort. Both were considered to be equally contributing to the war effort. Also, they were considered to be equal contributors to the war effort. And if you go on your course homepage, you're going to see there that there's actually a show that's called Bomb Girls. And it's about the Canadian woman's experience working in a munitions factory during World War II. And it's so cool because it goes through how they were treated. If you like the show Mad Men, it's parallel to that in terms of style and dress and also the time period. And it looks to see how women were treated back then and how they had to fight for their rights and the danger of working in a munitions factory. So if you get the chance to check it out, it's really cool. So 43,000 women served overseas, and this is predominantly the roles that they played. And again, parallel to World War I, they weren't out in combat holding the machine gun and shooting it. They mostly provided support and service positions. Similar to World War I, we're under the War Measures Act, but this time controlling rations and trying to do the best that we can to support and provide resources for soldiers was much more controlled and much more institutionalized than it was during World War I. So we actually had a Wartime Prices and Trade Board Act, which meant that there was a group of quote-unquote police officers that would make sure that you weren't abusing any rations, and that as much as we could provide for the soldiers, we could. So we're really trying to correct the mistakes in the treatment of the soldiers that we were giving them. And you'll see for yourself that the post-war era was much more secure, and we continue to live in that really good post-war era in comparison to World War I, where things kind of went crashing within 10 years. We did have propaganda posters that talked a lot about rationing during World War I. In World War II, they were kind of a little bit more threatening and tried to instill some fear. So you can see here that here's the police officer for the Wartime Prices and Trade Board Act. And here's a couple and they're hoarding flour over here. So that was like a definite no-no back then. Also, what we tried to do is to ensure that there was enough of a supply going to our soldiers overseas. We were given rationing stamps. So you were given these stamps that you would take to a grocery store, and they were for meat, butter, tea, coffee, gasoline, tires, alcohol, clothing, fabric, and silk, because those were the resources that were needed for soldiers. So everyone would get this rationing system based on how many people were in their family. And this is, are you reporting price increases? So anybody who was kind of taking advantage of the whole Wartime Act, maybe charging a little bit extra, they would post this in the newspaper, and it was parallel to World War I. So they would say, hey, look, the price of ice. So this complaints were received against 5 ice dealers in the province of Quebec who made increases in the price of ice. Sound familiar? So, you know, all of the social media posts that we have, and that's another parallel, right? So we see that there are social media posts of people who are not social distancing. There are social media posts about people who are buying too much toilet paper or, you know, buying too many masks. And so this was their way of kind of reporting what was going on. And it's very interesting because it's almost like, you know, a war condition that we're living in. We have to stay at home. We have to make sure that we're rationing. But I think that we're a little bit better off. Like, we have the internet and they didn't back then. So I wouldn't even want to know what it would be like to live during this wartime and not have my device, which would be very detrimental to my life. Anyways, moving on. So we again started participating, everyone. So they weren't encouraging soldiers of the soil like they did in World War I, but they were encouraging all families, all women, all children to kind of participate in the war fronts in any way possible. They planted victory gardens, they sewed clothes for troops, and the war conditions were much better because of the support that we were providing to soldiers during World War II in comparison to World War I. But similar to World War I, where we had victory bonds, in World War II, we actually also had victory loan drives as well. Essentially, what you were doing is it was very similar to the Canadian savings bonds that still exist today. You give your money to the government invests that money into the war effort, into whatever they think is going to yield money for them. Once the war is over, then you would get your money back. So the government conducted 9 victory loan drives between 1941 and 1945. Sorry about that. And they raised nearly $12 billion by the end of the war. So that's how the Canadian government was able to fund themselves in the war. War is big money and great money. So oftentimes governments will be kind of happy to participate in those efforts in order to see that recovery in the economy that they were looking at. Well, here we are, Conscription Crisis Part 2. So this is a really neat political cartoon over here. So the conscription crisis is going on, and Mackenzie King is kind of sinking because he doesn't know what he's caused. And here we have some voters happening and then also some protests as well. And we actually had, during World War II, a secret camp set up called Camp X. So this is a training camp responsible for training recruits for special operation executives of the British Security Coordination. So it was really where we could sneak in and we were trying to catch those German SS soldiers who were stealing artwork and gold and diamonds. So a lot of the German SS police, what they were doing is they were kind of hoarding all of those resources that they were finding as they were invading land. So what the Camp X was doing and what the Allied powers were trying to do is create this special secret task force where they could kind of find these SS soldiers and, you know, get back the stuff that they needed to for Europe, which was impacting the entire world. If you're interested in that type of espionage, you might want to look into a movie called Inglourious Basterds. It is rated R, so I'm not going to put the trailer up, but it's a really cool movie because it takes you into the secret task force, finding all of these resources that the Germans were hiding and what they did to kind of stop the German soldiers from doing that. So it's really neat. Also on the home front, there was a lot of social security that was provided. In 1940, the government passed the Unemployment Insurance Act. So unemployment is basically, if you lose your job, the government will give you 5 to 6 months of pay in order to help transition you into your new job. There are a lot of people who are laid off for now, and they're getting paid unemployment because of COVID. They're not able to work. So because they're not able to work, then the government is supplementing their income that way. So while war was bad on many fronts, there was also some really great things that happened as well. And continue watching to see what happens next.